Question. We have 4 exciting speakers today. I have had the privilege of communicating with all of them, so we are in for a treat. What we will like from you, the audience, is to please use the chat if you have any questions. If you'd like us to hear your voice, there will be an opportunity to ask questions after each session and at the overall session as well. So each speaker will have about 15 minutes to speak to us, and we're going to be quite strict on the timing as well. So for the rest of us, we'd like to encourage you to have your videos on if possible, so that we can see you, we can see your faces, and it just has a little bit of a personal touch. We will also manage questions on using raise your hand facility that we have. But of course, if you don't hear from us, please use the chat box to communicate with us, which we will be looking at actively. Without further ado, we have someone on ICT, human capital, and that speaks about human capital as well. We have a couple of people on public finance, and we have a lawyer in the house as well. Very exciting lineup. But as we start now, I would like us to welcome, if we can, even you can even go like that if you're on video, but we'd like to welcome our first speaker, who is an ICT expert, but prefers to be known more as a human resource capital development guru. He's passionate about human capital and the use of human capital, but he's going to speak to us about technology being more of a platform than a solution. And as we're in COVID-19 at the moment, where everybody bounces around the word technology, all of you have heard about the word 5G and that G and 4G and whatever else there is out there. But really and truly, what does technology mean to you and I? What does it bring to us? And how can we as a nation begin to think of the role that technology plays in our society? But most importantly, what is the impact on human capital? So without bursting his bubble, please welcome Mr. Folorunsho Aliu to take the mic as he presents his session to us in 15 minutes. Please give him a round of applause if we can see you. Thank you. So Mr. Folorunsho Aliu, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, James. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. May I crave your indulgence, James, to please cut me off or let me know 2 minutes before the end of my 15 minutes, so I get to stick on time. Thank you very much. I would like to look at this from. It's always good to set the pace or the ambit of the discussion. So I'll be looking at it from the perspective of one, technology within this COVID-19 era, and how policy from a national, state, and local government level would make the difference to us as a people, and how those things, how the policies we come up with right now will make a difference in the post-COVID-19 era. So without wasting your time, setting the ground rules, the first thing is to know that this COVID-19 as a pandemic was first a health issue. That had social impact on everyone. Respond to this COVID-19 issue is what we will get out of it as a people. Nigeria before now, if you look at it, have a lot of debt capital. And what do I mean by that? We have a lot of capital that have not been working for us as a people. We learn so much from there, but what do? We export our capital to other countries. In ICT, what do? We export our capital. What I mean by that is we export the human capability, we export our monies, and then we get something else in return. This COVID-19 period has come out to be a reset button for us as a people. And someone once said, if you change the way you look at things, after a while, the way you look, the things you are looking at will change. It's an opportunity for us as a nation to begin to look at the way we look at this problem from a different perspective. Before now, Nigeria looks at everything from a procurement perspective. When you say there's COVID-19 problem, the first thing we're thinking about is how do we buy this? How do we buy that? How do we buy this other stuff? If we do not change that perspective, no technology will work for us properly. If what would eventually begin to happen is we begin to spend so much money and creating more problems for ourselves. So, as a nation, we need to look at technology not just as the solution we want, but as an enabler. And like Bill said earlier, technology will give you the following things: scale. It will give you aggregation. It will give you a reach. It will help you create efficiency. But guess what? In all the things I've said, if you are doing the wrong things, technology will give you a scale to show your inability. It would magnify your incompetence. So as a nation or as a people, our policies must look beyond just specific type of technology, but first of all, look at what the real problems we are trying to solve are, and then choose the right technology to help us in scale, efficiency, and reach. As we speak today, we have a myriad of problems, from transport sector to agricultural sector to health sector to the health sector. Technology will only come into help when you already know where you are going and you want to drive efficiency and you want to drive scale. The question right now is, as a nation, what are our policies to take care of these different problems and then bring technology in to drive that? Now, I would like to also look at the different areas that technology can help us with and take some specific examples. So let's look at these health issues we have. What we have been hearing is we want to buy this, we want to buy that. We have been told globally by health experts that the best way to solve this problem is first distance and wash your hands. Every other thing that we're doing would take a long while before we feel the effect. So what stops the federal government at this time, or the state government and all that? It's okay, you're all going to go out at some point in time or the other, but we look for ways to ensure you can actually wash your hands. There are technologies you can deploy today that would allow you to wash your hands without touching someone else. And if you put this in different areas, in open zones all over the nation, you have done the following. You will have created economy, because then you will spend money for people to create these things locally and you put them in different areas. It is technology. It doesn't have to necessarily be ICT. ICT is a subset of technology as a whole. I'm sure you've seen some young men that have created this pedal type of hand washing that you don't actually have to touch the different surfaces. What if federal government says to people that in every market area, in every school, in every public space, we will help you to put these things there, and then you would have, what you would have done by doing that is you would have created a new economy with a Nigerian solution. And in doing that, you would, by that policy, what you would have done is you would encourage others to think of what they can do locally to solve this problem. Now, it sounds like it's something very small, but the truth is technology would only grow when you boost it, or you show that when there's investment in it, you can get money out. There are entrepreneurs on this platform. I'm sure you're not going to put your money in something you're not sure you will get returns from. But when government policy favors what you're doing, you would be encouraged to put in money, energy, and time to creating that. Same thing, we're talking about agriculture. Most people have not been able to go to farms now. You have harvests that are rotting in the farm. What if government says, hey, what if the government says that we're going to encourage you, if you have platforms, to ensure there is reach. Now, moving food from one state to another is still considered an essential service. But guess what? what are we doing in terms of ICT, in terms of other technology to ensure, excuse me, that we can get these food items that have been harvested and are rotting away in the different areas and zones in Nigeria, get them to people who truly need them. But if government is not going to put policies in place, drive that, very few people will go in there. They would be the one to make the money. But guess what? The food shortage. We also talk about connectivity. Today, when you talk about connectivity, everybody defers to either Zoom or Teams. They are fantastic platforms. But guess what? These are platforms that have been developed over time from other countries because someone shows them there's value in it. The truth is that we would miss this opportunity if there is no government policy that encourages Nigerians to build their own versions of this solution that will take into consideration our peculiar problems. Now, I'm not certain that before I finish my talk, this link will not go down. I'm not certain that before I finish my talk, there will be no break. These are peculiarities we have here. You have 2-3 phones in this part of the world. In some other part of the world, when they see you with 2 phones, they think you are crazy. Why? They don't have that peculiar problem. Do you know that we can solve that peculiar problem of connectivity here if people know that government policies, now I'm not saying government should put money, I'm talking policies. We'll put policies to ensure that when you have investment, you would have something out of it. That's the angle I would like for us to look at this. So I'm not looking at specific technology. I'm looking at from a policy perspective where government will say, from the beginning of this pandemic, as government come out to say, do you have any specific solutions to any of these problems we have in this country? We are willing to support 3, 4, 5 of this. I haven't seen any of such platforms. Instead, I've been seeing them from private individuals. The truth is this, we would rather take the money and go and buy, right now I'm hearing we want to buy something from Madagascar. What have we done about our local capacity? I think policies to government to say, hey, you know what, if you have any form of study, if you have any form of solution to this thing, we want to have a platform that would aggregate all solutions we have locally to these problems, and to this problem we are facing. And guess what? We can even see through these things as we go ahead. Mind you, I am not saying that there should be no competition. In fact, it builds competition locally when there's an aggregation and people know that if I throw in my heart into this ring, I must be ready to compete. In doing that, we'll refine this process very quickly. But if there's no government policy that drives us to competing properly and drives us to using our local solutions, you would find out that more and more we will be deferring to the perfect solution from outside the country. And as long as we do that, our foreign reserve will be under a lot of pressure consistently. Growing human capacity in Nigeria will be low because if you're not investing, people will take their abilities out of the nation. The third thing is our economy will suffer because then instead of people spending money, they will be holding back and trying to save money. And that is not the way to rejig an economy. The way to get an economy working is when you spend and people know that when money is spent, it will come and circulate back. That is what we need to do from a policy perspective. In a nutshell, and I don't know if I still have 1 or 2 minutes. In a nutshell, what I'm saying is, as a nation, from a policy perspective, policy standpoint, we need to have ICT for people. Example, sanitization. I'm sure a few of us have seen this overall sanitizer that people go through, like a machine that you go through and to sanitize whatever it is you have. I haven't seen any of that. And it doesn't mean we cannot produce it here. But guess what? I guarantee everybody in the next 3-4 months will be importing these things from abroad. Why don't you start that today? And government says, if you have a solution to this, we want to see that. Why? Because if you begin to have this in public places, then it begins to make it easy for people to go out. And you are sure that to a large extent, you are safe when you go into an environment with such things. And of course, we still use our hand sanitizer, stuff like that. But that is still technology. ICT is just one aspect of technology. You can use ICT to create a platform that will get everyone on board. Government, what do you call it? all government policies and all that? What if we have an aggregate? From the federal government right now, we are getting answers from different platforms. What if we had a single platform that you can go to a single platform as a nation and see the policy direction for government at this time? That is still not happening. Of course, as an individual, we can go ahead and do that. But have you noticed that when you create something locally in Nigeria, everybody tends to look down on it? Thank you very much. Everybody tends to look down on it. We believe nothing good comes out of Nigeria. And as long as that is the thinking and the mindset, we're not going to move forward. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Mr. Liu. Very well put. He did say to me before he started the session that make sure you stop me because I'm very passionate about this particular area. And I think all of us can hear and see that passion. And it's a different angle to ICT as well, because most times you get ICT people in and they bamboozle you with words. But what he's done there is really bringing it back home and saying, how do we apply the ICT to individuals? And I guess one thing I do want you to elaborate on is to say, you know, in terms of ICT, how can we as individuals come together and use it as an enabler or set up an enabling environment for ICT? Because we do say it's up to the government to do this, it's up to the government to do that. But is there something that we can do collectively like we're doing right now, educating one another on what's going on, what are the implications of COVID-19? What are some of the practical things that groups of people can come together and do in using ICT as a local solution like you've mentioned in your talk?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll give you a good example. Right now, the legal profession has been, I think, one of the hardest hit in this situation. And there's been talk about
okay, I think we might have a problem with his system there.
using Zoom to do an avenue for jobs. Anyone hear me?
Yeah, no, we kind of missed you. You cut off there for about a minute or so. So sorry, if you can just repeat your response to the question. Okay. Can I just ask us to perhaps put some questions on the chat for Mr. Liu? We have a connection issue. So what we'll do now is we're going to go on to the next speaker. But if you do have a question for him, please put it on the chat, and then we'll be sure to come back and ask those questions. What our speakers are also doing today is answering questions directly on the chat. So you'll be able to do that. Mr. Liu, do we have you back to respond to that question again, please?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me still? Okay.
Yeah, we can now.
I was giving an example on the legal profession where there's a need right now for judges to sit because we are getting backlogs of judgments to be read, people trying.
Okay, it looks like we're going to keep getting this, and I think that's a very interesting point.
There are solutions.
Okay, we're going to come back to you to just address that point again. But in the meantime, can I just ask if anybody has a question they wish to ask? Perhaps you could just raise your hand and we'll take a quick question from somebody else. Okay, as I said, if you have any questions, please raise your hand up or use the chat box. Thank you so much for that session. And I'm glad you mentioned something about the legal profession, because we do have a legal person coming in later on to talk about that angle, and perhaps we'll touch on your point. In your talk as well, Mr. Liu, you talk about what is the government doing? What is their response? What is the provision? And it's such an appropriate question for our next speaker, who is actually the senior advisor to the presidency and specializes in industrial policy for SMEs, etc. So she's going to be talking to us about what are the provisions that are being made by the government for businesses to survive in Nigeria, so that we know that the economy can begin to rebuild. And she's going to share some very interesting points with us that are not very public yet. They haven't been fully signed off, but they're close to being signed off. So she'll be sharing lots of knowledge about government policies, or the thoughts of the government, at least when it comes to saving our industries. So please help me and welcome Miss Adiri Akemu to address us. Thank you for coming on board. Over to you.
Everyone, thank you for that mouth-watering introduction. Thank you, and I think it's a privilege to be part of this discussion. My consulting background makes me give high premium to any opportunity for engagement. Let me first start with what our notion of priority is right now and how that has changed. I think for most of us on this call grew up in the era of Americanism, the era of globalization, multilateralism, and the theory of comparative advantage. Produce what you have the most natural advantage to produce, and the world will produce the rest for you. I think the advent of the pandemic has shown us that notion is, there's a lot of lies. There are a lot of lies in that notion. We've seen several very liberal countries impose restriction on exports when the pandemic started. Germany, of all people, or of all countries, imposed restriction on the export of medical equipment. Vietnam imposed restrictions on rice. India imposed restrictions on medicines. And most of all, Donald Trump imposed restriction on American funding for the World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic. What that goes to show all of us is that no one is coming to rescue you. Yeah, we're all on our own when push comes to shove. So what does that mean for us and our industrial policy? I think it sort of emphasizes and further ratifies the well-known statement that we have to produce locally. We simply have to produce locally. What it also does, it also questions what we think we have comparative advantage in, and what we should do if we say we don't have comparative advantage in producing a particular item. So what's going to happen? Should we leave it to the rest of the world to produce? And then when there's a pandemic, they stop. They say, don't send these goods to Nigeria. So what this means for us as Nigeria is that we have really, really questioned what we think we should be producing. And if something is not cost competitive to produce locally, who's going to pay for that cost differential? Because no right-thinking businessman will produce vaccines in Nigeria or drugs that you cannot simply get the raw materials, or the raw materials are ridiculously expensive. But not producing that drug creates an economic insecurity threat for the whole country. So who is going to pick up that cost? If we all agree that we have to produce these items. I think what the pandemic has done is that these questions have arisen as a result of the behavior that we've seen. And we just have to address these issues. If the businessmen are not going to produce these items, somebody has to pay for the production of these items. Where is that money going to come from? Who's going to bear the cost? All of those questions have to be answered. And I think that's what the government is focused on answering right now. In terms of what the government is focused on doing right now, I'm sure you guys all know many of these initiatives. The CBN has a lot of initiatives focused on the manufacturing sector and increasing financing available for the manufacturing sector. We all know that the governor is a strong proponent of local production. He's always been there, and what the pandemic has shown is that that thinking is probably very, very in line with how we should be thinking right now. There are various backward integration programs focused on our highest import items. So refinery, we all know about the Dangote refinery, the backward integration for agricultural produce, not just for packaging and eating, but because those are the key raw material items for many industrial and pharmaceutical products: sugar, cassava, palm oil, palm. So those backward integration for agro processing is not just focused on food processing, but also providing raw material inputs for industry. In terms of import waivers, there are numerous, too numerous to talk about, but the most recent ones we've heard, which the government spoke about, is medicine and medical equipment. And there are a lot of other incentives for, like the pioneer status incentives, so many to draw on. But if you look at these initiatives, all of them are designed to address our non-competitiveness. So it takes the legend has it. There are studies that say that it's cheaper to bring a good from China to Apapa Port than to take that good from Apapa Port to Sokoto. Initiatives are targeted at cutting that cost, non-competitiveness. So if it costs $100 to produce something in Nigeria and perhaps $70 in our biggest competitor, most of all these initiatives are supposed to compensate for that $30 difference. What we really must do is address the issues that make us non-competitive. And those are infrastructural, mostly infrastructural issues: power, roads. It is those initiatives that affect and equally benefit everybody. You don't have to even have a backward integration program to participate or to benefit. It protects and benefits everybody, those kind of initiatives. And most of all, it protects even MSMEs the most. It is MSMEs that cannot afford to increase their power costs. It is MSMEs that don't know a government official to issue a license. So initiatives, while the government recognizes that these initiatives that sort of improve our cost competitiveness are important, what is even more important are those other holistic and wide-ranging initiatives that are targeted at infrastructure. Those are the things that make the cost of producing rice in Nigeria more expensive than Vietnam, that has less land area. So those are the kind of things that the government has to, and is focusing on. One of these initiatives is the 15 trillion naira CBN Infraco vehicle, which is going to initiate. It's going to be launched in September with the Bankers Committee. It's just supposed to galvanize infrastructure development in the country. There are several others. There's ease of doing business. I'm sure everybody knows about the ease of doing business work. And those kind of things are the truly transformational investments that can address this issue of non-competitiveness, get to the root of why some products are produced locally, some cannot be produced locally, or we can't even get anybody to produce. I think we have to answer the question now that if there's a pandemic today, if this pandemic continues or gets worse, where are we going to get drugs from? Where are we going to get certain items from? Even security, where are we going to get certain items from? So the government has begun to answer those questions, and it has even become so clear that no one is coming to rescue us. We have to get this done ourselves. And I would say that the government is working, as like they say, like politicians say, tirelessly to get all of this done. I think in terms of what the problems are, everybody knows what the problems are. The questions that people have are, why are we not doing the right things to get them to resolve these problems, or doing the right things in enough, as enough of the right things. And I think this pandemic is a large step in setting us in the right direction. I hope that was clear enough. I'll stop here for now.
Okay, thank you very much for that short and very to the point message. What is the government doing? I mean, we were asking for this session really that is it sufficient? Is the government doing enough? Are they just talking behind closed doors? Are they actually making some of these initiatives as public as possible, not talking the talk, but walking the walk? A question came in and Mr. Liu answered it earlier on, but I think it's something as well that we can ask you. What is the government doing about children's education? Because in parts of the world, we know that children have been out of school for a while. What is the government doing when it comes to the education of kids in Nigeria that are not able to go to school at the moment?
Okay, I will just answer. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, I will just answer that question because not because it's my area of focus, but because I'm sometimes in the room when it is discussed. Now, this was a huge, and I agree with this problem because first of all, there are several factors to consider. Access to the internet to address, access to laptops, cost of data. Who's going to bear the cost of data in poor families? For rich, for other private schools, most of this education is being done via the internet. But for poor families, you can't assume that a poor family can bear the cost of data. So what the government is doing is, I think, twofold. There's on NTA and I think FRCN, they have daily programs where they run several educational programs. There's also an app that the Ministry of Education is rolling out or has rolled out. I forget the name, but I'm sure if you go to the Ministry of Education website, it's there. The Minister of State of Education has spoken a lot about it. There's an app that has been deployed for educating children that go to public schools.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. We also have another question on here that talks about, it says, due to the pandemic caused by COVID-19, several businesses have re-strategized options in the commercial market. This person would like to know how the maritime industry will benefit from these adaptive changes, both in the current state and post-COVID-19 era.
That's a specific one. What I know is that what the pandemic has caused is that the Port Harcourt port is now, if not fully functional, semi-functional, apart from the governor closing it. I think the Calabar port was also being made functional because of the backlog. Now, remember before the pandemic, there was a border closure. So we're already facing the border closure. I think there was a backlog at the Apapa port. So they started trying to open the other ports. Now, in terms of specific benefits to the maritime industry, I cannot say for certain, but there are several policies that address, for example, companies across sectors. For example, the Finance Act that was instituted last year we removed taxation for companies that earn 25 million naira and below. And if you earn 25 million to 100 million, you pay 20% instead of 30%. I cannot think of right now if there are any specific benefits for the maritime sector, but if I do, I will let you know because of this call.
Okay, thank you. That might be a nice takeaway for you. And even if it's after today that you get a response for us, it'd be nice for us to share it with our audience. Do we have any other questions for Ms. Akemu? Because she's the insider. She's the one that is in the inner room with the government and the presidency that you and I don't have access to. And I'm surprised you're not bombarding her with questions. So I would expect to see a few more questions in the chat to which we can bring to attention. Once again, thank you for that session. We really appreciate your time and in sharing those inside knowledge with us. And of course, as I said, we'll pick up questions on that later on. Our speakers have been wonderful in terms of keeping to time. I have to say, it's almost like we rehearsed this earlier. They have been very, very cooperative. So I say that because my next speaker, I have particularly warned not to go beyond his time. So he's got a tall order to follow. And so our next speaker is going to talk to us about the public finance. He used to be with the Office of Accountant General as a technical advisor. He's worked on a lot of monetary policy. He's worked with a lot of money policies with the CBN. And what he's going to be looking at today is a disciplined approach to how we as a nation are managing our finance. And I think most importantly for you and I as individuals, what are we doing, or what kind of satisfaction do we get or have that our money is safe in the bank? On the first day of the lockdown, we see so many people pile into the bank, closing down their accounts, being scared that banks are not going to be functional anymore. We would like to know, what is CBN doing about that? What are we doing to make sure that our banks are here? And we as individuals as well, what are some of those sustainable tips that we can have in terms of what we have now? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is the lead consultant for AMG Professionals. Please welcome Mr. Benga Badejo as he takes his session. And his 15 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the introduction. The 15 minutes is going to be pretty tight, but I'll do as much as I can do within 15 minutes. So getting straight to business, the ongoing pandemic really posed a difficult decision for everyone. And it has brought to the forefront the inefficiency on several business models and inadequacy of many plans and financial assumptions, including inadequacy in government social protection programs. And it has really put us in a very difficult position where we also need to take difficult decisions. And it is quite unsurprising that we find ourselves in this situation. Nigeria has actually been going through a lot of difficulties in their finances before the crisis. And the fall in oil prices also added to the health challenges that we are currently facing. But the good news is that it brings opportunity as well. Despite the difficulties we are also going through, it also gives us opportunity to rethink our business models and assumptions, which has been exposed following this pandemic, and to also have a crisis-proof path to prosperity. So for a nation like Nigeria, on the fiscal side, there are two options for them to resolve it, to getting back on the path to prosperity. So for the fiscal side, the first option is to make sure that adequate fiscal stimuli are put in place, and at the same time also make sure that we also have fiscal adjustment. So the fiscal stimulus that we've seen so far has been providing funds to the poor of the poor in economy and those that are all vulnerable to the crisis. And we have seen that we have had a lot of challenges with data. It's been difficult to identify who these poor people are and and those that are really vulnerable. We've seen fiscal adjustments on the part of the federal government too. They've been adjusting the budget because they adjusted the benchmark oil price to $30 per barrel. And whether this is adequate is another question. And we've seen adjustments on the expenditure side. So whether that also is adequate is another question. But the main question we want to ask is, given this increasing pressure on the finances of Nigeria, how can we adjust both our revenue and expenditure to cope with these challenges. The federal government cannot do so much on the revenue side. So I haven't adjusted the oil price to $30, which we may actually see more adjustments in the forthcoming month. The only option left to federal government is to probably look at their expenditure and see how much of the expenditure that can be adjusted. How can Nigeria fund the state?
Okay, so we might have a transmission error there. Benga, can you still hear us? All right, okay, I'm going to take a question and just pose it to Adira in the meantime. Adira, you have a question here that says, what measures has the government taken in protecting frontline workers, especially the healthcare workers? I think this pandemic has exposed the weak capacity, and not just to our health system, but also the education and economic system. So what are some of the measures the government has taken to protect our frontline workers who are faced with these patients, so to speak, or those that are likely to suffer from this horrible disease? And that's a question to Adira, please.
Like the education question, I'll just try to remember. Like I said, I'm focused on industrial policy, but I know that this is a topic that has come up repeatedly for discussion. All the strategies that people had recommended in the past to address not just the short-term or immediate help, but to make sure that, for example, healthcare workers are working in the best equipment, in the best environment possible, so that they even have the psychological and emotional support to do the work that they've been assigned to do. I know that I know this is a hot, if not the hottest topic in the government right now. Unfortunately, I can't think of anything specific or the specific initiatives apart from the increase in allowances for the frontline workers. So I know that there's been increase in allowances, in the daily allowances, but I know it's much more than that. But unfortunately, if I do remember, I will respond to the chat. But I know that that is a hot burner issue for the government, and I know that there are a lot of initiatives along this.
But in terms of basic things like PPE, which is a huge discussion around the world, we talk about the provision of PPEs for health workers. Do we have that? You know, is the government making that a basic provision? And most importantly, because we know that there's a correlation from the number of people tested and that data that we get in terms of infected and deceased, how much of the testing is the government providing? I mean, and I appreciate that it's not your area of specialty, but again, it's got to be muted in the corridors in terms of basic health provision and basic monitoring. Because one of the things we have been criticized for in Nigeria is our inability to collect data. And if we don't know how many people are suffering and dying from this horrible disease, then how can we know what to do about it? So how's the government, you know, kind of, what are they doing in terms of that?
Definitely, the information I have around this is quite weak. But I do know that testing is a high priority for the NCDC and improving the testing capacity. I don't remember the specific numbers and what the target is, but I know that there's a target that the NCDC is working towards, the testing capacity target per day, so that we can have a reasonable per capita testing to even give us comfort that, you know, the number of cases we've identified represents a true numbers of people that are sick. But unfortunately, I don't have the specific numbers or initiatives.
Thank you for attempting to answer it, though. Thank you very much. Do we have Gbenga back? Gbenga, can we hear you now?
Yes, I'm back now. Thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
So how can the Nigerian state fund its present and future budget and service its ongoing debts, given the fact that we've been running a deficit budget for quite some times now? So having worked in government, there are three options that are really available to government. So the first one is to use all ways and means to manage the crisis, or to fund the budget, or to finance whatever expenditure that we need to finance in this crisis. So the first thing is to go to the monetary authority, borrow as much as we can borrow, or exceed the overdraft limit with the central bank. However, the central bank has a limitation because of its act. So there's actually defined amounts of advances that central bank can give to federal government. So the next option will probably be, again, is to devalue, is to go ahead and devalue our currency so that we have more foreign, we can keep our foreign reserves. We can reduce our foreign reserves by and have more domestic goods or services.
Okay, I think we appear to be having a few problems with Gbenga's line. So we might have to go on to our next session quickly. In the meantime, do you have any questions for any of our earlier speakers? We can address those now, or we can go over to our next speaker, who is our legal expert. And it's particularly exciting to have a legal person speak to us about some of the legislations that are proposed or are being discussed, or some of the impacts of the ones that we know, the very common ones. But just before I do that, I'm going to take a question, and Adiri seems to be the target this afternoon, so apologies for that. But again, there's another question for you here, Adiri, that says, and I think I have to just remind us again that her area of specialty is industry. So if she's not able to give us answers that we want to the questions that she's asking, please forgive us. And what we're going to do is probably work on those questions and perhaps input it into future sessions, because as we promised, these sessions are really every fortnight. So this question is for you, Adiri, if you're able to attempt it. Are there any palliatives being provided by government for people who lose their jobs as a result of this pandemic? In other climates, there are unemployment benefits that can be claimed. What do we have in Nigeria? So again, in Nigeria, we've seen a lot of people being handed tiny bags of food for a household of 8 people. We see other countries that are helping those that are self-employed. They're helping individuals. We know that locking people in a country such as ours is really not helping them. And people are saying they'll rather die outside than die inside for the inability not to go out and make money. So that question is really for you. What are your thoughts? Because I think it is linked to industry anyway. What are we doing to give our people money to survive? Over to you, Adiri.
Yeah, I guess this is one question I can answer definitively. And it speaks to what you said at the introduction. Some of the initiatives are still awaiting final approvals. But I'll just talk about the themes of those initiatives. Now, these initiatives are being led by the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, are largely targeted at self-employed individuals and MSMEs. So the first one is to reduce the cost or reduce the burden, payroll costs that MSMEs are facing now with reduced revenues. So how can you support the MSMEs such that they don't have to bear the whole payroll costs for keeping businesses alive, where the turnover is not as much as it was perhaps 2 months ago. What the government is doing is their government plans to provide a payroll palliative targeted at employees of MSMEs. When I say MSMEs, sorry, I just mean some kind of categorization of beneficiaries, possible beneficiaries, targeted at self-employed individuals, because I may be a DSTV installer, an Uber rider, an electrician, I work for myself. The fact that I don't have a registered company shouldn't disqualify me from benefiting from these government palliatives. So the second one is targeted at people in that category. There's also a third category, which is how do you keep production going? Cut off demand because the people should not move about. You've also said some kinds of businesses should not open. So how do you continue production, one, and then where is the offtake for those items going to come from? If you say people should not go to specific areas or within specific days. So the third initiative is targeted at stimulating production and guaranteeing offtake for those items. So all these items are being given out as palliatives or as for the National School Feeding Program, or for states or federal government initiatives. So the third initiative is aimed at stimulating the community for other programs. So if I will summarize, there are three kinds of schemes that the Federal Ministry of Industry is seeking approval for. The first one is a sort of like a payroll burden for employees of MSMEs. The second one is for self-employed individuals. And the third one is to stimulate production of certain items and guarantee the uptake of those items. So I don't know if this addresses the question Tunde asked, but all of this is directed at easing the pain of the reduced demand one, and of course on reducing the risk of people being sacked by MSMEs. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. That was a very robust response. I think Tunde will be pleased with that. Gbenga, I'm not sure whether you're back on. There's a question on here. Gbenga, are you back on?
Yeah, I'm back now.
Okay, there's a question here for you that says, from Bola Samuel, that says, I agree with you that government revenue is dwindling for reasons most of us know. How effective would you say government savings policy is? Or if at all there's any.
Well, just like I was saying earlier on, that on the government side, they really don't have enough fiscal, buffer to deal with this crisis. So I will probably tell you that government actually not been saving enough, if at all they've been saving. So government actually they've not been doing so much on creating fiscal buffer before this crisis, and the crisis has actually thrown these out. Has thrown it to the public to let the public know that government does not really have enough buffer to deal with this crisis. So fiscal adjustments will not go too far. So what we expect government to do on the fiscal side is to accept that the fiscal space they have is very fragile, and to turn back to households, to turn back to businesses, to turn back to Nigerians and give them tax holiday, give them waiver, give them suspend stamp duty if possible for the meantime. And as well, probably back to the VAT assumption. And because the people that are mostly affected by this crisis are those in the informal sector. And the informal sector in Nigeria constitutes about 80% of those of the working population in Nigeria. The guy who repairs phone at the mall, the guy who does Uber, the guy who doesn't even who has no registration of Uber, who probably uses his car to make an ends meet, the electricians who go for their daily needs. So all these people need to get some sort of comfort, some sort of palliative from the government. So fiscal adjustment on part of the government may not truly work without going back to fiscal adjustment that affects the people. The budget, they've been trying to adjust the budget, and we can see that it's still not working. The personnel, the payroll, the wage bill, I mean, is huge for the federal government, and they can't save. They can't save. They have to continue to pay this payroll. I mean, to pay these employees that they have. Employees of government too will also have to take some cuts. So they have to take some cuts. So what we think the government should focus on the fiscal side should be deferring taxes if possible. Allow people to have tax holiday. Allow companies to have tax holidays. Allow small businesses to also have tax holidays. Those that are already, I mean, paying taxes. And again, give a lot of waivers, but the waivers that will not conflict with the efforts of the monetary authority. So I will go to the monetary authority very fast and leave the fiscal side because of my unstable internet. So what is the monetary authority doing in this pandemic? The first thing the monetary authority will do is whatever response they're going to give in this pandemic should be that which makes sure that the financial system becomes stable despite the crisis in the economy. And we've seen a lot of support that the central bank has been given. They've announced 1.1 trillion support for the economy, which is very fantastic. And 100 billion out of this 1.1 trillion is going to be for the health sector. And we've seen targeted credit facility that are meant for household and corporate. They've announced 50 billion that will be operated through NISA. And we've also seen support for the manufacturing sector. We've seen support for other sectors, other risk sectors by the central bank, which are quite fantastic at this time. And that is the way we think we should be going. And we need to also let people know that this support that central bank is giving is economic support and not a social support. So meaning that only people who have economic income are going to be supported by this palliative that central bank is putting forward. And meaning that if you do business, if you have some sort of income and you think your businesses will be affected by this crisis, by this pandemic, then you can apply for this support. And for those already on CBN intervention, they can as well ask for extension of moratorium on existing facilities. They can also look into reduced interest rates on existing facility. All facility at 9% can be renegotiated and have 5% on it based on the CBN announcement. Another thing we have seen again that CBN is also doing is to give a blank check to the banks and promising them that if they need be, they will support them with liquidity, in addition to all this support that they have given to the risk sector. So they're also on the side of the banks too, to make sure that our banks are healthy, to make sure that if our banks run out of cash or want to run out of cash, they are being supported. They're also allowing some sort of regulatory relaxation, the forbearances to the banks. They're making sure that, okay, the banks can now relax. I mean, banks can renegotiate.
Okay, all right. Again, we seem to have a cutoff from Mr. Badejo. I have someone just in the meantime, just to catch up on the chat while we wait for reconnection. Someone said we should stop picking, well, not in their words, but stop picking on Adiri because she is not the government mouthpiece, and that is truly very, very true. Her specialty is in industry, so we can limit our questions. But I think the good news that I have is we have someone in the house who has offered to bail Adiri out of all these wide questions that are outside her remit. And this individual is a technical advisor to the Statistician General of the Federation. I'm going to conclude that they're probably a statistician, I'm not sure, but obviously they'll be more enlightened on the data that we're collecting in Nigeria, and they'll be able to share a bit more. So perhaps if I can ask Asirio Joe to just address us for about 5 minutes on some of the questions that has been coming up for Adiri, and just generally respond to some points that we've had raised. Can I ask you to just take over for about 5 minutes or so, if we can give you that time, and just to address us on some of the questions that Adiri was going to come back to us on. Thank you so much for offering that.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can.
Okay, good. So my name is Asiri. I'm not really a statistician, but my background is in economics. I presently work with the National Bureau of Statistics in Abuja, so I can give some background on what's happening at the statistics side. I don't know the specific questions because I kept coming off and on because of the network. So I don't know any specific questions that were put to Adiri that I need to answer, but I'll just speak generally on what is happening on the statistics side and how the statistics system in Nigeria right now is trying to support the effort of government in during this whole COVID era. So what we've been doing even before the pandemic started was to try as much as possible within the resources that are provided to the office, to the system, is to produce as many statistics, as much data as possible, covering a wide range of areas. So if you've followed the work of National Bureau of Statistics over the past few years, we don't just publish survey data, we've greatly increased the range of statistics that we collect and publish on a regular basis. And all this is in an effort to support government. If government is not taking decisions using statistics, using actual data, then those interventions, those policies will be faulty. They will not address the real needs of the people. And I think historically, this is one of the major problems that we've had in Nigeria, that we've not really used statistics and evidence to target our interventions. So you see, for example, a state governor or a government will say they want to create 5,000 jobs or 10,000 jobs in a specific sector, for example, in aviation, in transportation. But if you don't have the actual information on the needs of that specific sector, how many people are available, how many trained personnel you have in that sector, what the real needs of that sector are, even though you pump a lot of money and resources to that, to whatever objective you're trying to achieve, if you're not addressing the real cause of the problem, then your interventions will not really, meet the objectives you're trying to achieve. So so that's one thing. So there's the production side of statistics, making sure that the information is available, that the information can be accessed by policymakers, by the general public, to also hold government to account on their promises and all of that. So there's the other side of utilization of the statistics. If we provide the statistics, how are those statistics used to actually inform these policies? So lately, within this COVID era, what we've been trying to do, even though a lot of our work has been hampered, when the lockdown started for about 3-4 weeks, our field officers across the country could not go to work. They couldn't, they had to sit at home, so they couldn't collect data, the regular CPI, for example, GDP data that we collect. There was a break in that. But what we're trying to do now is to leverage on technology. We recently installed a call center in the office. So we have a database of companies, households. So now we are making some calls to find out, to ask different questions on how, how the COVID, how the COVID situation is affecting households, how it's affecting businesses, just to get that information, so that once we get that information and provide that information to government can then use that information to tweak, to adjust their policies and to adjust their targeting, so that they target people who actually need these interventions desperately. If you notice, over the last couple of weeks, we published the latest poverty study that we did. Even though it raised some eyebrows in certain areas, but that information is valuable to government. We're talking about people losing jobs and people living in desperate situations. That information would help government to identify areas where people are most vulnerable, most deprived. So government can actually use that information to help to target those those communities, those households in those areas. So that is the way. That's one of the ways we're trying to become relevant in this in this situation. Going forward in the next few weeks, I'm sure you'll see more information coming out from recent studies that we're doing. That's just how we're using statistics to help and to become relevant in this situation. We're providing as much as possible, as many statistics as we can lay our hands on. Statistics production is very, very expensive. That's one thing people don't know. And for a very long time, the Nigerian statistical system, not MBS, but the system in general, has not been the best funded system. And that's the same situation across Africa. African statistical systems are not very well funded. I don't know if it's because our governments have not historically understood or appreciated the importance of data, but this is changing anyway. Absolutely. Funding is improving, so as this is happening, more information will be coming out, and then government can use this information, and not just government. The information is also there for the general public. You and I, citizens, we can use that information to hold government to account. To ask questions. Okay, why is this thing? Why is unemployment increasing in this area? Why is the rate of poverty, increasing in this area after so much interventions? So the statistic is not just there for government to use, but also for citizens to hold government to account. Absolutely. I think I'll just stop.
Thank you.
There for now.
Thank you so much. So for those that say we don't collect data in Nigeria, I think that's a very encouraging message. And you're right, if we don't know what we're dealing with, how can we address the issues? So it's really comforting to know that I'm hoping we have a bunch of economists in your department that are actively working on this. And I think to answer the question of why did we not have so much data in the past, perhaps the ease of collecting data is somewhat easier now with the development of technology. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring in our final speaker because he's been really, really patient. And I promised to bring him in earlier than this. So I'm going to hold on Benga's message, which, to be honest, I'm going to conclude, but I'm going to reserve some questions for him. And I also have a couple of people that need to respond to him. But before we get into that exciting point where we can begin to have a debate on some of the things that have been discussed already, I would like to bring in our legal expert. It is no party without a lawyer. And I think it's important that we hear from them because they are the ones that help us do the right things. And there are a number of them on here today. But representing the legal profession in our midst today, someone who's going to be talking about the various legislative responses we've had to the pandemic, both proposed and both in talks. We've seen a lot of talk about the infectious disease bill. We've seen a lot about the economic stimulus bill. Which one is important? What do we need to know? What does it mean to you and I? How can we lobby? How can we encourage this? But most importantly, how can we understand the legal spiel? What do they really mean? So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to us our speaker who is going to respond to some of those areas that I've mentioned. He's from Oyebode Aliko and Co, and he will be speaking to us, and his name is Mr. Dindan Kili. Over to you, sir. Your 15 minutes will start now, but I think I'll give you 2 minutes extra because you've been really patient. So thank you.
Thank you, Beam. Thank you for the kind words. It's a great pleasure to speak after the great speakers that have come before me. I'll do my best to stick to time. So I'll start with what the National Assembly has done so far. I guess a lot of us will be aware that the Emergency Economic Stimulus Bill is out there. The Control of Infectious Disease Bill is also out there. There has been a proposal to introduce a stimulus bill for free electricity. And we expect that the National Assembly would consider the adjustments to the appropriation bill, or what we call budget. Interestingly, the Emergency Economic Stimulus Bill, this bill for free electricity, and the Control of Infectious Disease Bill have one name in common, and that's the Speaker of the House of Reps himself. He's been the one sponsoring all of this. He appears to be very, very active at this moment. I would go to the Emergency Economic Stimulus Bill. Just before the lockdown, a day before the lockdown was announced in the FCT Abuja and Ogun, the House of Reps quickly passed this bill. However, in spite of their resumption from the lockdown, the Senate is yet to consider the bill. The Senate resumed on the 28th of April. Interestingly, it simply adjourned plenary sine die. Nothing was said about the bill. But the important aspects of the bill are essentially three. First is that it seeks to provide temporary income tax relief for employers. Somebody has mentioned something about that. In this case, any employer who maintains the same staff strength without retrenchment as at March 1 till December 31st is entitled to 50% income tax rebate. Very interesting provision. The next one is about deferral of mortgage payments under the National Housing Fund. The bill seeks to defer all mortgage obligations on residential mortgages obtained by individual contributors to the National Housing Fund. Well, I don't know how many people key into this in the private sector, but it's important. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I saw you shaking your head. I thought I went off for a bit.
No, I can hear you.
All right then. So I'd mentioned the deferral of mortgage obligations on residential mortgages, essentially for contributors to the National Housing Fund. And then the third aspect of the bill is import duty waiver on medicines and medical goods. So the bill provides for a waiver of import duty on medical equipment, medicines, personal protection equipment, and such other medical necessities for COVID-19, or as the minister may by regulations publish. And that's from effect, it will be in effect from 1st of March to 31st December 2020. Now, the bill is not yet law because, like I said, the Senate has not considered it. And it's already a month since the House of Reps passed it. We are waiting on to see what will happen. We don't know whether the Senate will resume soon, but then we just wait and see. For the stimulus bill for free electricity, this was also mooted by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Interestingly, he mooted it on his Twitter page. They have resumed. There has been no mention of it. So we don't know. The bill has not been presented. So at this moment, we can only hazard a guess as to what the contents will be. So I move on to, that's about the Emergency Economic Stimulus Bill. Now, the interesting one, and the one that has been putting up a lot of controversy of late, is the Control of Infectious Diseases Bill. This was introduced on the 28th of April when the House of Reps resumed. And on the same day, it passed second reading. It's an ambitious bill that contains 61 sections, quite long, divided into 6 parts. Now, the first part is about administration, and it clearly sets out that the power to administer the bill is vested in the Director General of the NCDC, subject to any direction of the Minister of Health. Part 2 talks about control of infectious diseases within the Federal Republic of Nigeria, empowers the President to declare a public emergency and impose restrictions in any area described as public health emergency zone. A refusal to comply with any order made by the DG or with any direction is an offense. An arrest can be made without a warrant. The offender may be removed by any authorized person and be placed subject to such order or directions as the DG may determine. The DG may also institute public health surveillance programs where he suspects that there is an outbreak of infectious disease or any other disease that the minister may declare as infectious. Now, the bill also provides for compulsory testing and treatment where the DG suspects that somebody is infected or there is a carrier. The DG also has the power to prohibit or impose conditions, that's under the bill, for the conduct of the wake of a deceased person he suspects to have been infected before his death. The DG may order detention and isolation of any person suspected to have been infected. The DG may, not the DG now, but the minister may declare any premises to be an isolation area. Now, the bill just says any premises without specifying how this will be done. The bill also provides that the DG may direct the owner of any building to abate overcrowding if he suspects that there's overcrowding in that building. Any person aggrieved by such direction of the DG is allowed to appeal to the minister within 7 days. Interestingly, the decision of the minister on this appeal shall be final. The DG may also prohibit or restrict meetings, gatherings, or public entertainments for a period not exceeding 14 days in the first instance. The DG may mark any premises where infectious disease has occurred, and anybody who removes this mark without authorization shall be guilty of an offense. An enforcement officer may obtain an order of a magistrate court for the destruction of any house. The president may declare any foreign territory as an infected area and may restrict the entry of vessels from that place, may also direct that a ship be quarantined. The president may require international vaccination certificates for any person on an international voyage, whether arriving or leaving Nigeria. And when there is a suspected outbreak, or an outbreak itself, the DG may order compulsory vaccination, but for a fee. Now, enforcement is done by the DG or any authorized officer. Any person who is found guilty in the first instance shall be, for any offense that the penalty is not clearly stated in the preceding sections of the bill, shall be liable to a fine not exceeding 100,000 naira or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or both. A subsequent offender will be subject to 200,000 naira fine or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months. Offenses will be tried by the magistrate court, and there's a protection from personal liability for the DG and his officers or any person he authorizes, or even a police officer enforcing this act or this bill. The minister may, however, grant exception to any or exemptions to any compliance with any provision of the act or the bill. Now, a lot of criticisms have trailed the bill. We know that it's the intention may be noble in view of the exigencies of the moment, but the criticisms have trailed the bill. For example, if you listen to me well, you notice that I kept saying the DG shall do this, the DG shall do that, and the DG shall do this. Sometimes the minister. People believe that so much powers, in fact, enormous powers have been vested in these officers, and there's a likelihood of abuse for political purposes. Well, we know Nigeria. Governors are not also taking it lightly. Their powers under the Quarantine Act, which will be repealed by the bill, has been removed, which means governors will now have to be subject to the directives of the DG of the NCDC. The provisions on compulsory taking of tests vaccination and public surveillance. People believe that those provisions will breach the rights to privacy and the dignity of human person. Well, we have religious adherents who also don't feel that it's okay to order compulsory vaccinations or taking of tests. The obligation to release data of health personnel is also deemed to be likely to breach the right to privacy and dignity of human persons. So is the provision for arrest and detention without warrant. So is also the finality of the decision of the minister, which goes contrary to the provision of the Constitution on fair hearing. The minister is an interested party in this case. He has powers under the bill, and then he sits on an appeal and makes his decision final. He can't even go to court. The power to declare any property as an isolation center is likely to violate the right to own property, because it is not even stated clearly how they will determine or arrive at the conclusion that a particular property should be an isolation center. The power to arrest any person walking on the street may also, people claim, may also be misused. Even with the lockdown, we've seen how the police and other security agencies have reacted, not to talk of having this power under the bill. Now, because of what we've come to see with COVID-19, the exigencies like I mentioned, it is likely that if this bill goes through further processes and is promulgated, it's likely that still some parts of these provisions will remain, because I fail to see how some of these measures can be implemented without taking away certain aspects of rights. It will be quite an uphill task, but it remains to be seen after the public hearing that the Speaker has promised for the bill. And we're waiting to get even the directives on how the public hearing will hold, whether virtually or in person. Some reactions have also trailed the bill. Senator Dino Melaye, we all know him, sued the National Assembly, and on Friday got an interim status quo order directing the National Assembly to step down on the bill until the examination of his suit. He claims that lots of the provisions will breach his fundamental rights. The Governors Forum have also issued a statement asking the National Assembly to step down the bill until there are wider consultations with stakeholders. Interestingly, even the NCDC DG said, "I'm personally not in favor of drafting a bill in the middle of a crisis." So there's a lot left to come. Now, what are other legislators doing in other climes? I'll start with the United States because it's been in the news a lot. On 27th of March, Trump signed a $2 trillion coronavirus act, well, simply called CARES Act, Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act. The act allows spending of funds on loans to small businesses so that they can keep employees on the payroll, funding to hospitals and for testing, direct payments to individual Americans of up to $1,200 per person through direct deposit to banks and by checks in their mails. Now, this bill was passed by the Senate on the 25th of March. The House of Representatives passed it on the 27th of March, 2 days after. On the same day, Trump signed it into law. 2 days timeline. Now, the fourth relief bill that the US Congress considered, because a couple of other reliefs came in between. That bill was for $484 billion package. And it was passed and signed in 4 days as well, between 21st to the 24th of April by both houses. Now, the IRS in the US is still sending stimulus checks under the first bill. And as at yesterday, the House of Representatives passed a $5th trillion stimulus package, which is believed to have been fueled by an increase in unemployment rates in the month of April. That bill, I believe, will get to the Senate and we'll wait to see what will happen. But then that's the speed in which these bills have been going through the Congress in the US. In Canada, the Senate also passed the COVID Response Act on 24th of March, 2020. The House of Commons passed the same act on the 25th of, well, then it was a bill on the 25th of March, 2020. And it received royal assent same day the House of Commons passed it. So this was a 2-day timeline as well. The act provides for relief to cover one-time stimulus payments to citizens, temporary additional child benefits, income support payments to persons with a total income of at least $5,000, and allows for withdrawal of up to 25% from retirement income funds. Without reinventing the wheel, the House of Commons or the legislature in Canada simply amended existing legislation that covered some of these areas. Something that was something similar to what was done to the Nigerian Finance Act last year. Now, a second act was introduced by Canada, passed and assented to on the same day, 11 April 2020. In fact, the Governor General was just waiting for the act to arrive so that he can assent to the same. Now, about the complaints of taking out rights from people, possible violation of the rights of citizens with the Nigerian Control of Infectious Diseases Bill. I know that other countries have also, in the race to address the problem of COVID-19, passed other legislations that have suspended human rights in other countries. Hungary has done something similar to that. The law they passed on the 30th of March suspended a couple of laws and bypassed Parliament, allows the president prime minister rather, to bypass Parliament and adopt decrees on an unlimited basis. Cambodia, for example, has a draft legislation that will empower the prime minister to restrict civil and political liberties. Armenia, the parliament granted authorities broad surveillance powers, even allowing them to use mobile data to track the virus. That's very interesting. In South Africa, regulations were passed recently criminalizing content intended to deceive any person about the pandemic or the government's measures to address COVID-19. This has been said to be likely stifle the press. Ghana introduced an Imposition of Restrictions Act on 21st March 2020 as well, which empowers the president to impose restrictions on persons in the event of an emergency, disaster, or similar occurrence. Now, this is what other jurisdictions have done. You could see the synergy between the executive and the legislator, whereby the executive simply waits for the bill to just arrive at their desk and then they sign into law. That synergy, I've not seen it in Nigeria. Something is being initiated in the House of Representatives. The Senate is detached from it. The executive is doing something else. I think my time is up. I would be here ready to answer any questions any person may have. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Keeley. I've never met any law firm that makes law as interesting as Aluko and Oyebode. They're absolutely fantastic, honestly. And some people might think lawyers are boring, but honestly, they do make, after accountants, of course, they do make the profession look very, very So thank you for that. Such an eye-opener, and it's quite nice when you get someone that is technical, break it down to the language we understand. So we've looked at the expediency of passing these laws, but the question we have in Nigeria is, are we in danger? Should we have a quick release of these bills, especially after hearing some of the things that actually impinge on our basic human rights? So that will be quite interesting. I guess we're going to have some questions for you, Mr. Keeley. So if you do have any questions, please put it on the chat. I'm going to quickly bring back Mr. Liu, just to respond to Mr. Badijo, our Winga Badijo's point earlier on. He's just got 2 minutes to address a point in which he disagrees. So I think that will be quite interesting. And in the meantime, please put your questions on the chat for Mr. Keeley so that we can take some legal questions, because I think he touched on some very, very crucial and controversial areas that I cannot believe we wouldn't have questions for him. And I assure you, he's more than capable of answering your questions. So please don't be shy, put those questions to him. And I promise you, even if he doesn't have a response, we will get a response back to you because, as I said, they are a wealth of information as legal practitioners. So, Mr. Liu, over to you. If I can just get you to actually spend maybe a minute on responding to some of Winga's points, who unfortunately has had a lot of interruptions. But let's just hear from you very quickly on the points, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again. Mr. Gbenga raised some very interesting points that I felt were conflicting, and I wish he were here so that he can clarify it to me. He said something about reducing the VAT collection. when you look at a typical income statement, you would see that revenue and your revenue, then you take out your cost of production, and then you'd have operating costs and all that. Now, if you tell government to reduce VAT in this area, that is one of the, what do you call it? That's one of the areas you can actually increase government revenue. Now, if government does not have money to do what it's meant to do, then it's going to go back and affect the people. I think what we should do is thinking of increasing revenue and reducing government's direct costs. So cost of governance, for example, should be reduced. Forgive me if there are people, senators in the House and all that. Time, their cars or what we're able, and then all those heavy cars, all the heavy fleets and all that, we reduce those. But then government must look for ways to increase revenue. And the way to do that is to ensure productivity is increased, ensure that there is flow of funds, and people you need to stimulate production. To segue into Ediri's issues about what do you call it, production stimulation. I think CBN is doing you can't solve all the problems using monetary policies. We are so skilled using monetary policies almost to solve everything. Throwing money at everything is not the solution. And that's why I talked about policies. I didn't say government should be paying people to do stuff. Create the environment and let people compete and create new things. Someone talks about education. Telling people to come and listen on NTA, Channel 10 and all that is not going to solve the problem of education. We need to stimulate productivity in that angle to ensure that money keeps coming in and people can provide for themselves and create what do you call it, you can contribute to government coffers. That's what I think we need to begin to do at this time. Stimulate people to be able to produce everything, and it must be what's the word now? It must be multifunctional. Don't get lawyers alone talking. Don't get doctors alone talking. Human problems is not just one way. It straddles every area of life. And that's what we need to do when you're bringing experts in to discuss this issue. Let's solve each problem from different angles. And that's the way we'll solve our national problem. Sorry for taking your time.
No, thank you. And we totally agree with that. And I think we have demonstrated that this afternoon. We have luckily an economist that joined us. We heard from the lawyers. We've heard from you as well, the human resource capital developer, who is also an ICT specialist. We've heard from people that work in the government, with the government. And so these are also ordinary people that are representing the interest of you and I. So, and that is the whole point of all the sessions we've been holding, that we should have a diverse group of people that bring their views. And of course, we're going to have the views that we agree with and those that we may not really, but that's the whole point. That's why we're bringing everybody together to discuss all of these issues, to get enlightened on all of these issues, because it's only when you're enlightened that you can contribute. If we continue to walk around ignorantly, then we will not be able to do much. And that is why we have started this series of COVID-19 response webinar series. Is about talking about the white elephant in the room, the one that nobody else wants to talk about. Lots of appreciation coming in from the legal talk, in addition to all the people that have spoken as well. Mr. Okafor says there, I agree that we must stimulate the economy with production, not by throwing money around, but the tax holiday to be granted to SMEs must not be discountenanced. And that is absolutely true. In different parts of the world, we can see reliefs being given to the SMEs because they are the lifeblood of the economy. And so what you have in various countries is ensuring that those type of businesses are propped up to survive this thing, which we don't have an end date to. And so I think there will be a bit of the point that you've made, Mr. Aliu. There's a bit of the point that Mr. Badejo has made that can be taken into consideration, but we know that one hat does not fit all. So thank you so much for all of those. We really appreciate your contributions. I just want to now leave the floor for us to take some verbal questions. Perhaps if we have somebody that wants to speak, you can just signify by raising your hand or indicating in the chat that you'd like to speak, and we will take your questions verbally. So if we can have any further questions, and we can address those now. And our speakers are eagerly waiting. And I also have to
Sorry,
thank
Bim.
our speakers as well that have been picking up questions as they come in on the chat. So Mr. Keeley, you would like to say something? Please go ahead. Mr. Keeley, did you want to add something? Oh, okay. We had a
Yes,
question
I did.
from Mr. Dingan earlier on from Wallington, Mr. Wallington Moore. Let's try and find that.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yes, I have the question here.
Okay.
So his question is that can the process of passing the laws be expedited by president executive orders? That's the question here. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that in recent past, the federal government, the president particularly, has been issuing executive orders in respect of certain aspects of the economy. But these are distinct from the process of lawmaking. You can't use an executive order to hurry up legislative bill making or lawmaking. That's quite different. It's something that executive can do. In fact, they've been rolling out certain policies without even executive orders, like the palliatives they've been sharing, the directives from the CBN and some other regulatory agencies. But legislative process is different. Bills have to go through the processes and then get assent from the president at the end of the day. Sorry, excuse me. Now, the reason why we're having these delays, like I mentioned earlier, is that there is no synergy between the two arms of the National Assembly and the executive itself. So typically, when you see the speed in the USA and Canada, for example, some of these bills were initiated by the executive. Like in Canada, both bills were initiated by the executive, and they were just waiting on the legislators to go through the normal process and bring it back for signing. Before they do that, I'm sure you understand that there's a lot of lobbying that will go around. They probably will have lobbied all the legislators and have them ready and just waiting to deliberate on these bills. They probably will have sent advance copies to them to read through, so that there will be little time spent going through the bill clause by clause. Now, in respect of the first bill that the US Congress passed, in actual fact, some of the members of Congress wanted to participate virtually, but there was an insistence that almost all of them must show up in DC, Washington, DC, and attend to the deliberations on the bill, because it was quite urgent and the government needed to move fast. And all of them did arrive, dealt with the bill, and it went to Trump. Immediately he signed. So the only way we can get these things done fast is for the leadership of the National Assembly, as well as the executive, to sit together, strategize, harmonize their positions, and get this thing done. In answering this, I also remember you mentioned something about being careful not to rush the control of infectious disease bill. Now, when I was talking about timelines, I'm sure that I didn't put that into consideration. My primary concern was with the stimulus bill. If it was intended to save jobs, for example, the tax relief to employers who maintain their staff strength, if it was intended to save jobs, then it was important that that should have been done immediately. Because as we are talking now, it's been a month since the bill was passed by the House, and a lot of people have lost their jobs already, because employers are not even sure what incentive may come from the government. If there was a bill that was passed, it's taking too long to even be considered by the other arm of the National Assembly. Why should I continue to maintain the same staff strength when I'm not getting sufficient income? So I think I don't know whether I've answered his question well enough.
I think the question has been well answered. There's a follow-on question, but I think you've also captured this question. This question from Mr. Bola Samuel is saying, how can we ensure the fast-track legislation is not underpinned by weak scrutiny of the bill? And I think you've covered that, unless you have anything else to add to that.
I think I have.
Yeah.
I agree that the control of infectious disease bill need not be rushed. That can be done at any time. In fact, the Quarantine Act, for example, was not passed in the Quarantine Act of 26 was not passed until about 8 or 6 years after the Spanish flu troubles had passed.
Mm.
So there is no need rushing that at the moment. We're already taking steps with other policies. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one thing we've learned from this COVID-19 season is that there's no point reacting very quickly to things we'll need in the long term. And so a lot of thought needs to go into these before they're finalized. And I think I'm going to complete your session question with a comment that was made by Mr. Obina. And he said, the bill on control of disease as draconian as it was rushed, but the real ones that were for direct benefit of the people are on a snail pace movement. What a country. And unfortunately, that is a reality. We have another question from Laolu. I think I'm going to make it the last question as we're drawing very close to the end of our session together. Can I take the question from Laolu, who I believe would like to ask it verbally? Can we have Mr. Laolu's question, please?
Laolu has gone off, so
okay.
Else has a question.
All right. So perhaps he had issues with connectivity. Okay, so we've heard a lot this afternoon. It's been, and I think that's one thing this season has taught us. I refer to the season of COVID-19 as the GOT. I call it the gift of time. It is a time for us to reflect, it's a time to energize, it's a time for us to learn about a lot of things. And this is what we're doing at Periscope Consulting, giving you live responses to the issues at hand, bringing them out of the closet and talking about the reality that everyone is facing. And that is why our topics will be quite diverse, from technical to personal development, to welfare, and so on and so forth. So as I said earlier on, we've heard from the lawyers, the human capitalists, the public sector experts, and the politician representatives of those that are in civil service. We have heard all of that. And we're encouraged by the fact that, yes, our government is working, but perhaps not at the pace that we want to see it. Yes, our governments are making decisions. Maybe they're talking about it, but not particularly doing it. We've also heard about things that they're actually doing when it comes to statistics, where we have our economists contributing to data collection, which can assist the government in making the right decision. I think that is very encouraging. We've learned about technology. I mean, I'm really surprised that nobody talked about 5G. And to me, that says that a lot of people have become enlightened that 5G is not the beast, but perhaps the enabler that is going to get us to solving local problems that Mr. Aliu mentioned earlier on. We've learned also about the government policies, industry-wise. What are those incentives that the government is doing to keep the MES alive, to make sure that they still thrive so that we can have that economy that is left? We've also been challenged that if this continues, receiving our medical supplies might become a problem. So we're being forced to look at alternative ways that we can get that into the country. I think there's a job for all of us. Many of us are joining this call from more than 7 countries around the world, and we can see what is going on around the world. Mr. Keeley has given us a benchmark comparison with what other countries are doing when it comes to legislations. And I think it's time for us to continue to motivate, encourage, and push one another, and push the people that we know. Create forums like this to learn from one another and to really, really find practical solutions to where we're going. So in closing, what I'd like to do is really appreciate every one of our speakers. Mr. Folonsho Liu, who opened up, thank you so much for your passion and drive. We appreciate that. We thank Ms. Ediri Akemo, the star of the show, who really was bombarded with lots of questions as if we were speaking to the president. Thank you so much for your insight. Thanks for not getting tired and, you know, willingly participating and answering all the different chats. We also say thank you to Mr. Gbenga Badejo. Even though he had weak connectivity, he was still going on, and I think his message was very, very clear. So thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate your contribution as well. And lastly, and so rightly that we finished up with the lawyer in the house, Mr. Dindam Kili, thank you so much for the insights, for breaking the legal spiel down for us so that we as Nigerian citizens can really understand what is going on when it comes to legislators. I'm going to extend our thanks to the admin in Periscope as well for putting together this call and making sure that it went out to each and every one of us and we could all participate. Thank you so much to the guys that are working behind the scene. Latifa, Rabi, thank you so much for making sure that all of this is put together. Thank you to our head, he doesn't like to be mentioned, but I'm going to say it, Mr. Bayo Adams, the star of the show, who likes to lurk in the background. Thank you so much, sir, for putting it all together. We appreciate you as well. And lastly, the audience. We can put this together, we can do whatever we want, but if we do not have your participation and your presence, we cannot make this happen. And so we appreciate you. Words are not enough to express our appreciation for your contribution, your engagement, and everything you've made possible today. Thank you so much. We are being challenged to make sure that we give you another session in 2 weeks. And so please watch out for our invite. We're going to be bringing another session to you in 2 weeks under our series called Response to COVID-19. And I'm going to add life response to COVID-19. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening wherever you are in the part of the world. And until we share our session next time, see you soon. See you in 2 weeks. Thank you and bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I would like to say a very big thank you to all the speakers today. For Mr. Liu, thank you very much. Edi, thank you very much. And I apologize for the setup. We never talked to you about how deeply this was going to be. Then I can imagine how embarrassing the network has been. Thank you very, very much. Mr. Dindam, we're most grateful. And for some lifesaver, lifeguard, Mr. Eziri, thank you very much. Bim, you've always been doing this and you've done it again. Thank you very much. The objective for us at Periscope, just like Mr. Liu said, is to have different perspectives to the issues the issue at hand. You know, I think for me, mainly, yeah, the COVID issue is only supposed to help us to think, and we can only think together. No one has the answer. And in thinking and getting the solution for us, the objective, like Mr. Liu also said, is to develop homegrown solution to this problem at hand. And like people are saying at the moment, COVID has come to stay. So how are we going to live? How are we going to strive? And how are we going to excel with COVID from different perspectives? IT, human capital development, finance, public finance, and then we've also seen the legislative and the legal perspective. We'll continue to do this. We started with the medical perspective the last session. Now we're going to this. We don't know what the next is going to be, but we'll continue to bring people together to think. And we're going to make an addition to this. We're putting together like a communique that we'll try and send to those in authority. Thank God for having a Dini and a Ziri in the house. We use this to pass the message. These are what the people are saying on this platform. And again, to everybody on board, we cannot but say thank you very much for making it a success again. For our moderator, thank you very much for putting everything together. We thank you all and we wish you a very beautiful evening, a great weekend, and a very beautiful COVID session that will lead to a better life for every one of us. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
You're welcome, Baya. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
All right, bye.